Good afternoon and welcome to our Procurement Forum. This event on procurement is part of the Business Insights Festival of 2021, Festival number 3, which takes place today and tomorrow with a number of different events taking place. We're talking about procurement, and there's a general theme of, are we seeing a trend for procurement to play an increasingly important role in company boardrooms, moving from a less transactional activity with a focus on price to one which is more strategic. And there are a number of themes that go within that, which we'll be talking about today. So this session is going to look at what the latest developments and practices are in the world of procurement, and how businesses can take advantage of those developments to actually do more business with their own clients and their own prospects. I'd like to welcome our guests as well. So it's a fairly relaxed session that we have here. So if you do want to raise any questions or make any points while we're in debate, please do not feel afraid to, just talk about what issues you have and any comments that you have on what we're talking about. So without any further ado, let me introduce the panel, I will ask the panel to introduce themselves. So the first person I'm going to ask is Kate. And Kate has been instrumental in helping set this session up today. So thank you for everything you've done on this, Kate. And please, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Thanks, Steve. I'm Kate Skillman. I am one half of Gimlet Associates, a small business which helps support other businesses in their approach to public sector tendering. We help them understand the tender process and what it takes to be a good supplier so that you're in the best position to engage with procurement and contract managers within the buying authorities to retain contracts once you've won them. So yes, we work with suppliers as well as the procurement element as well. We've been working at this since 2014, just had our 6th birthday, and going nicely from strength to strength. We work across the country and have a nice little clutch of customers abroad as well. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Graham, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, my name's Graham Crawshaw. I'm the Services Director at a relatively small company called CASME. And I'm one of those unusual people that's actually been in procurement all of my career. And not many people can say it, but I always add in that I started off in the music industry, not playing instruments or singing, you'd be relieved to know, but doing procurement, whether it was for a compact disc factory in Swindon, Wiltshire, or involved with right up to the streaming contracts that were required when everything changed to downloading. Now I work for a company called CASME, and the organization supports actually large global organizations with supporting their category managers with procurements, and specifically putting on sort of roundtables almost similar to this to get people together to share, recognizing what is important and what they need to do to manage their procurement strategy. Predominantly private sector, but equally some public sectors, most of them global. That's me.
Thank you, Graham. Andy.
Hi, my name is Andy Hawkins, and I run Business on Purpose. We've got two strings to our bow. One in the public sector and charity sector. I help support clients through their Social Value UK framework, which helps them to measure and understand and grow social impact, which a lot of public sector and social value procurement needs to be measuring. And then within my corporate clients, I help them using the B Corp framework and help them go through the B Corp process, which helps them measure and improve their social and environmental impact. And a lot of procurement is now talking about trying to improve social and environmental impact using supply chain, and B Corp is one of the tools that we can potentially use as a standardized toolkit to help companies do that.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Sorry, Andy, I mean. Dave, sorry, you're the next one up.
Which name have I got there? Yes, I'm Dave.
Sorry.
I'm Dave. I'm one of the co-directors of Practical Procurement. Myself and my main co-director have both been in procurement 30 odd years each. We tend to be a mixture of private and public sector. I tend to be more private and Mike tends to be more public. We offer workshops to businesses to understand the benefits of procurement. We also go into larger businesses to help redefine procurement structures and strategies. We also deliver projects within businesses, whether that be small or large. Additionally, we do some hand-holding for SMEs to understand the impact of their bad sales so they can see the impact that has from a procurement point. In other words, as the buyer, what turns us on, what turns us off. And within that, we're obviously emphasizing the needs for the softer side of procurement with regards to the environmental side, the risk aversion, and obviously anti-fraud practices and all those sort of things as well. So Dave Bass, Practical Procurement.
Good. Thank you, Dave. Matt.
Hi, afternoon, everybody. I'm Matt Roper. I'm founder of Buying Support Agency Limited. Founded it, gosh, back in 2002. Prior to that, I was in procurement. Found my love of procurement at Unilever. What I love about procurement, by the way, is just, I mean, the discussion we're having today is a lot of it is around social value, for example, and the environment. But how procurement, if it's done well, can really make a huge positive, hopefully positive, impact on society and the environment, as well as obviously the company itself. So I have a big passion around that, and as we've developed Buying Support Agency, we've developed services that help companies both reduce costs through our buying group. We also do auditing, best practice procurement, and outsourcing of procurement tendering. But we've also developed an eco side of our business, a sustainable procurement side of our business called greenbuying.co.uk, which is about helping source eco-friendlier products and services for UK businesses and schools. And we have a lot of fun doing that. It's been really great, a challenge, but really good. But as I said, it has a social positive, so very up for that too. Based in Cheltenham, and looking forward to having a really good discussion today. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And finally, it's me. I'm going to cheat a little bit as well. I have done procurement all my career as well. Now, the reason I can say that is that when I started off at the tender age of 21, I actually did do procurement. I didn't actually know what it meant when I started, but I did it for 16 years for a large telecoms company, various things that I procured in my time there. Then I decided I wanted to work client side, and I started doing bids and tenders into clients, but I was still dealing with procurement, but this time I was dealing with the client's procurement organisation. And then I've spent the last 10 years before I left the corporate world dealing with public sector, right, which is quite you need a lot of patience when you're dealing with public sector clients. So I've done procurement, both sides of the table. So I decided in 2019 that I wanted to start up my own business. And what I did was I bought into a franchise with Auditel, which means that I'm working with about 100 other procurement specialists who've all got different experience. And I kind of go around talking to businesses about helping them with getting, increased cost savings out of their suppliers, helping them to implement a green agenda down their supply chain, and generally making them more profitable and releasing cash flow for them. So that's me. Thank you everyone for your introductions. In terms of the subjects today, we've got 4 subjects that we want to talk about. And my timekeeping last time was not brilliant, and we ended up chopping one of them off. So we're not going to start with that one, but the one we chopped off was the automation debate. So that one's going to appear earlier, so to make sure that we get enough time to talk about it. But the order in which I'm planning on covering the subjects, we'll start with supplier relationship management. Then we'll move on to automation, which is the one we couldn't have a conversation about last time. Then we'll cover social value and corporate social responsibility. And then we'll talk about sustainability as well. And we did have quite a big debate on sustainability at the last session, but it's an ever-moving thing, and there are more things we want to talk about in that area in any case. So if my time planning works well today, we must cover all four. So we're going to start with the supplier relationship management and best value debate. And you often read information in the news that organisations are moving away from a traditional, maybe adversarial approach to dealing with their suppliers. When it's very much arm's length and something that has been in the retail industry probably quite a lot in recent times, and you now hear that they're trying to get close relationships with their suppliers. So the question is, what is supplier management and best value, and what should businesses be doing to get the most out of it with their clients and their prospects? And I'm going to ask that question of Kate.
Supplier management, to my mind, from my experience of having worked with businesses, particularly those who want to retain contracts, supplier management is a two-way process, and it's much underestimated as a two-way process. It depends as much on the supplier proactively engaging with the buyer, not just when they have to, but keeping the communication open as the buyer working with the supplier. I see supplier management as a partnership, first and foremost, rather than a sort of transactional invoicing process, which I think sometimes it does tend to edge towards. And I think once you get towards the simply issuing invoices when service or product is delivered, you've not really got much of a hold on management and every benefit that good management can deliver. Those benefits can generate as innovation and therefore better value in your service delivery, identifying more closely aligned products or services, more technologically sensible products or services within the supply between supplier and buyer. So I think to keep things reasonably crisp, that would be my interpretation of what makes good supplier management. It is that fostering of the partnership relationship rather than simply the transactional buying, selling, invoicing, asking. It is a proper relationship process.
Okay, thank you. Matt, what's your view?
Okay, so my experience of supplier relationship management started when I was working at Unilever. We were in the vanguard of developing strong strategic relationships with suppliers and working hand in glove. And I agree with Kate wholeheartedly that it has to be a two-way approach. It's not something that is dictated upon by the buyer to the seller, otherwise it won't work. One of the early lessons I had from that experience, which I follow on to this day, is that it's got to be led properly. It's got to be thought through strategically. You don't have the resources, particularly SMEs, just do not have the resources to manage all of the suppliers to the degree that would add all the innovation and the value add that Kate was alluding to. So I think one of the first steps I would always advise is think carefully about why you're spending more resources of your own in developing relationships, and select the relationships that are going to add the most value, where you're going to get the most social value and profit at the end of the day. Often supplier relationships are not understood by all in the organization as well. And again, if you're going to do it properly, all elements of your business need to understand why you're building the relationships and the partnerships with suppliers, and all be engaged and in alignment, if you like. But I think buyers instinctively, what I think increasingly now, understand the importance of supplier relationship management and building the relationships, especially for partnerships. But they do need the support, the budget, the resource, because it can take a lot of extra time and money to do it properly. And so my message really is it's critical for things like social value to have an integrated supply chain, but just plan it first. Don't just jump full, headlong into it before you've really understood why you're doing it.
Okay. Graham, what's your view?
I mean, I agree with the comments made so far. Interesting, from the work that I've done over the last year, it's a statement of fact that those organisations that are investing in supplier relationship management, they've done better in terms of getting through some of the challenges of the pandemic. And it just shows that it is down to the relationships. It's people like to deal with people. And fundamentally, that's what procurement is about. And having the ability to really work with your supplier. And I think one of the ways that is done is by giving the supplier more information. So whether that's letting them know what you're really trying to achieve, getting them more involved with some of your business objectives, it does make a big difference, because the supplier can then understand what you are looking to do and therefore can offer more, whether it's innovation, other ideas, different alternative products or services. I think whenever I talk about supply relationship management, I always like to use the word trust. And I think in terms of a mindset, that trust does need to be in place. And a lot of people, you could liken it to a marriage. And if that trust is in place, the supplier knows how they can help you, and you actively are working with them, then you can do great things. So it is worth the investment and the time to really build those relationships. And also, when you meet with the supplier, have the relationship conversation almost separate. Deal with the day-to-day stuff. Deal with any issues or challenges or any sort of tactical work first, but then take time to actually talk about the relationship and then develop it forward.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Matt, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Do you mean me, or do you...
Oh, no, sorry. I did it the second time now. I meant Dave. Dave, I've got a block on you, Dave, here. Sorry. Go on, Dave.
You know, last time you saw me. No. Yeah, I'm going to echo as you'd expect from a lot of the panel, that I agree with a lot of it. I think the only thing I would emphasize, in my view, is the supplier relationship has to be not only, as Graham said, where there's a trust element, but there's actually a bit of reliance. Now, that's a word that makes people a bit nervous. I think where you have a reliable supplier relationship system, let's talk about systems, you have suppliers who are the technical advisors in the marketplace who effectively can anticipate your needs before you know. Now, if they're doing a good job and you've got a good relationship with them, that conversation two-way can help you build your own enterprise, but also help protect yourself from competition. And if you've got a good relationship with those suppliers and you are monitoring those suppliers effectively, then you can almost tailor things to the best of your advantage. And that isn't just in a cost way, that's in a risk aversion way and keeping up to date with the dynamics of the market or the industry. It's also looking at moving forward, interpreting opportunities for improvement, whether it be environmental, whether it be CSR, whether it be legal, compliance, whatever the various areas are. But in addition to that, I think supplier relationship, those companies, it's been around for a long time, to be honest, and I can't remember which one of the panel has said it, to be honest, and apologies. Those companies that haven't done it are now behind, and whether they be SMEs or whether they be large internationals, they are behind. They just don't know that. I think certainly our business and some of your business, I'm sure, help support those people and handhold them through that exercise and help look at their supplier base. So Matt mentioned about the investment needed to manage the supplier base. I think if external parties are in a neutral format and go in and explain the benefits of that and perhaps do that on an ad hoc basis for them, that helps. But without true openness in the relationship and understanding limitations of suppliers as well, and that's important. Supplier relationship doesn't mean you can be the answer to every prayer. Sometimes it is a supplier being open and saying, this is the limit of my technical ability. I think once you've got that open dialogue, you got supplier relationship managed.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And Andy, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, with pretty much anything, relationship is key, and what we've been talking about is how to build relationship and how to build trust. One of the best ways that I've found in doing that is to make sure that you're always adding value, and sometimes, certainly initially, that means that you're adding value for free potentially as you start to build that relationship. But we're all in business, and if you're not adding value, it's really just a friendship rather than a business relationship. And of course, there's value in that, but we really want to be adding value to the relationships that we're involved with, so that the supplier and the seller feel that there's a two-way street to be had there. One of the things that I think is really important is to try and discover what shared values you have. So as well as providing value, it's to discover what shared values you have. People will want to buy from people predominantly in terms of their emotional procurement from people that they feel an affinity with and who they think that they've got shared values from. We'll talk about it a little later in terms of the sustainability and environmental values, which is mainly what I talk about. But certainly any kind of values that build trust and build relationship, those shared values, in my experience, are critical.
Okay, thank you. Matt, can I just pick up on something that you said when you did made your thoughts? You said you need to plan it. Okay, what would you say would be the starting point? How would you, if you're not doing supplier relationship management now as a business, what would be the first thing you would do to implement it?
I would map out first of all, kind of a basic audit, if you like, map out who you've got at the moment, who are your suppliers, and the relative importance. And what do I mean by importance? Ultimately, assuming you're in a profit-making business, for example, or an innovative-based business, then you've got to think about the risk and reward. This is why I said about the importance of planning, because you are going to need to put the legwork in, otherwise it won't work if you're going to do it properly anyway. So as I said, map out who you currently got, work out where your higher risks are in those supply chains, and work out where the real value is through those supply chains going out to the end customer. And I think that will dictate to a large degree which suppliers to go for first, because you're not going to have the chance, you're not going to have the resource to go for everybody. So you are going to select. The other thing is also your power and your influence over your suppliers. If you're a smaller business and some of your suppliers are very, very large, you may find it difficult to cut through to justify them providing the resource at their end. So again, it's a balancing act between relative risk and value, but also where you are in the power base with your suppliers. And I think, because also my final point is this, it takes time, and therefore the people running the business need to see that it's worth putting that extra mile in with the relationships. So it's no point if you go for the wrong suppliers and you can't articulate to your stakeholders what the value add has been in spending more time and energy, people will lose interest, and the procurement department and person will lose credibility. So it's another reason why you need to pick your suppliers carefully, because you do want early victories. You do want to be able to communicate to the stakeholders the value of doing it, so that hopefully it can be expanded, not restricted in the future. Okay.
Any other thoughts about how to start off a supplier relationship management initiative?
Yeah, from my point, I approach it slightly differently to Matt. I mean, I do it in the same way sometimes with the business, the enterprise. I think you need to understand the risk, or you need to assess the risk of the service or the goods being provided to your own business continuity and reputation. I've been to many large businesses where they've done a cut through and ignored suppliers below 200,000 spend or whatever it is. So let's just write our tail off. Let's not look at those, whether from a category management point or supplier relationship point. And I said no, because some of those smaller suppliers are actually more critical to your business continuity and reputation than the larger ones. So you need to assess the risk of what's being procured, essentially whether it be a service or goods, and people quite often concentrate on goods, forgetting that the fact that the guy who services the electricity to your factory is not being looked after. You know, if you're not getting your generator maintained and your factory goes down, and who cares about you having the goods there if you can't produce anything? You know, it's fundamental things. So I think you look at the overall risk of what you're procuring, and then internally you then look at the dependency and the reliance of the supplier that are providing the elements you're looking for. And then you say, well, actually, what's the risk of using that supplier, risk and benefit of using that supplier for that risky item or service? So I do it slightly differently, but at the same time, you can look at the opportunities of the cost element. Of course you can. But for me, the improvement and continuity of supply and the technical knowledge and the advancement of your provision to your end customer is the overall goal. Does that make sense? Right.
Very much so. Yeah, I was on a webinar yesterday where someone was talking about Boeing making aeroplanes, and there's currently a shortage of aluminium, I think, is currently the case. And it's a small spend item for them, aluminium bolts, but they can't get their hands on them. And if they can't get their hands on them, they can't make planes. And that's another example of tail spend is important to manage.
One of the major delays in HS2, I understand, is some of the tooling equipment is missing.
Yeah.
Well, look at Pete. Sorry, look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, just look at PPE. 15 months ago, probably no one even knew what the initials were, let alone it be such a critical item to so many organizations.
That's not the procurement of that.
Yeah. Just before we leave this subject, because we've been talking about, you know, problems such as SMEs don't have the resources, got to be careful with how you manage your resources before you start implementing these initiatives. If a business is implementing supply relationship management with their supply chain, if you're one of those suppliers, how should you prepare to work with your client to help it work for them? Any thoughts?
I would say listen.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most powerful starting points, and sort of almost go in with an open mind. I think so often the supplier could be dubious or suspicious that procurement is actually only trying to drive down cost. So keeping an open mind, listening. One of the phrases, and I know it can be a little abused or overused, is this concept of customer of choice. And I think both buyer and supplier need to sort of assess, well, where am I? Does the supplier want to supply me? And as a supplier, do you want to supply that buying organization? And so listening and really working out what that relationship could look like is probably a good start.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
The suppliers would do well, the suppliers or potential suppliers, because this includes ITTs as well, in RFIs and all the sort of online things and offline things and chats. The suppliers and potential suppliers have to understand the policy of the buying organization. Now, understand doesn't mean section 2, subsection 3, paragraph C. It means understanding why is the customer preferred. Now, the problem we have there is some larger businesses and some public sector have written policies that are, to be honest, too wordy, and have actually gone away from the real guts of what they need. So they need to have an interpretation. If they're not aligned with the customer's ideal, it's a mismatch and it isn't going to work. But if they don't understand it, they should have the openness to be able to ask and say, well, why are you asking for that standard, or why are you asking for that registration? They should have that openness, and that goes back to our previous comment regarding the other, doesn't it? So,
the other thing I was thinking, actually, it's interesting that the way you put it was again the traditional view of the buyer approaching the seller. If I'm a proactive seller, one of the things I should be equally doing is thinking about partnerships and relationships with the buyer and be proactive. So don't wait for the buyer to come to. It could actually be quite a smart move anyway, because the more you show that you want to understand the buyer and solve their problems, hopefully the more sales you're going to get in the future with that buyer. So I think that it's the seller has an equal responsibility, but again, you know, sellers equally are have a lot of resource challenges often, and they don't have the time to do a lot. So they are equally going to have to think carefully about which buyers they're going to agree to say yes to. They can't say yes to everybody, and so therefore they have to have a strategy too.
I think quite often the sellers have a problem identifying who in the buying organisation to talk to, because they may have a friend in operations as opposed to procurement, or maybe a large company where procurement are faceless essentially externally.
That's right.
Shouldn't be, but it happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. So that's a very good 20-minute debate on supplier relationship management. I think the focus is very much it has to be a two-way thing to make it work. You've got to think about what you're trying to achieve. You've got to start somewhere and you've got to plan it to go forward. So yeah, very, very good debate. So thank you very much for your comments on that one. We're going to move on to the second subject. And that second subject is all about automation and use of data. So this is the one where at the last forum where I managed everything really badly, we had about 5 minutes to talk about this one. So hopefully we've got a bit longer today. And I'd like to start by showing you, because if you're reading procurement related news, automation and digitalization and digital transformation, all that stuff is always in the procurement news. And just as an example, there is the current edition of the in-house Procurement Professionals magazine with a procurement cyborg on the front cover, asking the question, can you automate procurement? So it's very topical. So we're going to get into this subject now. So the question is, how important are in automation of procurement processes and innovation to supply chains of the future, and what should businesses be doing now to prepare for a more digital world? And I'm going to ask Matt to kick this one off.
Okay, I mean, the reason why it's topical is that technology has got to a position where it is much cheaper and much easier, if you like, for companies of all sizes, not just the big blue chips that have huge budgets on IT and what have you. Even the very smallest micro businesses can take advantage of both software and hardware to automate. If you're a seller, obviously, then you're getting a lot of push down from bigger buyers demanding that you automate your processes. But it fundamentally is becoming more and more required. It's crucial for competitive advantage. And again, a bit like Dave said about partnerships, if you're not in the automation game now, you're going to really, really struggle because as supply chains become more integrated, the expectation is that automation is a big part of that, and IT. So it's really, really important. I think for a number of reasons, the benefits are kind of obvious. I mean, first of all, improve supply relationships. If you can automate a lot of the data capture, you can understand much more about what's going on down the supply chains, and you can start to challenge the bottlenecks, for example. You can improve, you can speed up the process of buying by improving and automating the processes, you know, sending out orders, the e-tendering. All of it is increasingly becoming automated. Thank goodness the public sector is much better now around e-tendering and e-procurement. That also is important because it enables more organisations who perhaps weren't traditionally geared up for the big procurement bidding process can now get involved because they can go online and use the e-procurement tools. So a lot of, you know, I could go on, but a lot of key benefits of why people need to automate. Procurement needs to be upping its game to understand what the pros and cons are of automation. After all, you can't automate everything. I think the human touch, the relationships is a critical part of value add too. We can't remove that part of it, but absolutely as part of the rationale for cost reduction and efficiency gain, we absolutely need to be looking out there in the market and understanding how we can further reduce the mundane data, the mundane work, freeing up time so that people can look at more strategic aspects of procurement too. So I hope that answers the question, but it's a big topic.
Yes, which is why we struggled last time when we talked about it. We only had 5 minutes. So I'm now going to ask Graham. What are your thoughts, Graham?
Yeah, I've got a number of thoughts on this. I think, first of all, there is a perception that every other company is much more automated than your own. There's a perception that some of the buzzwords, Steve, that you rattled off there, which are littered in the procurement press and conferences and the big digitalization. And in practice, even amongst the larger organizations, it's still very much a journey they are going on. And there's one fundamental issue, and that is in most organizations, it's finance that determines the main computer ERP system that's being used. And so often it's designed for finance's reasons. Procurement, on the other hand, isn't interested in general ledger codes, but is much more interested in the supplier taxonomy. And so you immediately got this sort of challenge where you need to invest in modules that are going to support what procurement does. I think I like to bring it back to basics. And for many companies, the challenge before you can do all the whiz-bang stuff is actually making sure you've got the clean data in the first place. Because if you don't start with a baseline of clean data, of consistent company names, of correctly coded parts, if you haven't got that in place, then some of the extra work of automation isn't going to be successful. I think I would say that once you've got the basics cleaned up, then actually starting with some spend analytics, getting you that information so you can go to other parts of the business and talk with authority is then a good way forward. And then just build from that point as you can afford, or in terms of cost and also time, to then consider more complex modules. I would also say, having done some recent benchmarking and asked which tools are companies using to help manage relationships, to manage risk, the number one tool is still Excel. And so if you are an organization that is reliant on using Excel for planning and doing so much of your procurement activity alongside the main finance system you've got, then you're actually in quite good hands. And if you've got clean data to use that, you can start to make progress. So there will be more technology. It will help, but it is frustrating than the perception out there in the marketplace is that everyone's using blockchain and digitalization to fully automate everything. And as you said, Matt, I actually, I think one of the key values of procurement is the fact we can't be automated. It's about the relationships.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Is it really Dave this time?
Yeah, sorry. I've been revising.
Apologies. I'm somewhat a little bit controversial, and Matt and Kate probably know that already, haven't dealt with me for many years, but in a positive way. Very much in favour of data supporting decisions but not driving decisions. That's the first thing. Secondly, I totally agree with Graham saying cleansing data, that's fine. I've been to so many companies, we all have, where they categorize suppliers by what they advertise themselves as on Google or whatever, when actually that's not what they're providing to you. So there might be a one-stop shop you're buying for all your ironmongery to keep your doors, if you do a house build or whatever, when actually they're not that. They're providing something else, and you're buying that instead of what their niche, their normal core services are, or core products. The problem with data is relying on it where there's no predictability for the future. I think if you're starting to look at setting procurement targets or setting automation of orders or setting even potential budgets of spend based on historical information, one, if that's categorized wrong, you're going to go down the very wrong route and you're going to have the wrong suppliers and create more risk. But two, you're not actually achieving what might be the future need. So you have to have an intelligent interpretation of the data, and that will never be replaced. It will never be replaced. And I personally, SMEs, if they want to use Excel, I have no problem with that. Whether they want to use it for contract management, whether they want to use it for planning their orders for the next 6 months, if they want to use it for their supplier relationship, no problem whatsoever. If they're comfortable with it and it's set up correctly and it's populated correctly, but importantly, it's interpreted correctly, then it ain't a problem. And when you go ERP routes through JD Edwards, SAP, or all those sort of ones in the background, they're fine. But at the end of the day, some of those ERP, MRP systems are quite inflexible. So we all know you have a supplier, you might have a category code against them, but do they really fit that category? When you want to look at the spend of it, so if you're looking at, I don't know, building maintenance, does that mean they're a decorator? Does it mean they're a roofer? Does it mean they're a plumber? What does building maintenance mean? You have to get the finite detail. I think sometimes if businesses don't set up that data trend at the beginning correctly, or the data set correctly, that is a massive issue for the future, because if they then bring in category managers, which is another discussion I would argue, those category managers might actually be missing a scope of their spend. And that's not just in monetary terms, but that's in risk to the business, as per the previous conversation. So from my point, I think the other, sorry, just quickly, I'm aware of time. You mentioned what do businesses need to do for the digital world. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
I think on the RFI, ERFP, e-auction route and all those sort of things, one of the things I educate businesses on is have a pack ready. You're always going to be asked for your company account. You're always going to be asked for your company profile. You're always going to have that, but also have it in a way that you can customize it. The worst thing to do is send it with a previous customer on there thinking they're the best customer when you're their opposition. And I've had that as a recipient. And those suppliers, funny enough, didn't get the work. Now, having that bunch of things ready will help, because businesses are automating the sourcing side of procurement, and that I agree with to a bit more prominence. I think it is important that people do improve how they source suppliers. And if you're casting a wider net, there are less procurement people, so you do need to automate that element a little bit. But you still have to have the intelligent function where you have the operations team and senior management team and procurement making a decision based on the provisions of that data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Right, thank you for that, Dave. And I'm now going to ask Andy.
Yeah, I, in a previous life, only a few years ago, worked for an intelligent automation software company, and we sold software into clients. For example, we automated a 4-hour manual process down to 6 minutes, took them from a 50% data accuracy up to 100% data accuracy, and in 1 year saved that single client £50 million. So I am a huge advocate for the strength of what automation can bring. But I think the takeaway that we would have from that client, and indeed other clients, is use the right tool for the right task. And often the human is the right tool, and often a human who has been augmented with some intelligent automation is a better tool. So we're not huge fans of automating everything. We're huge fans of automating the right things and let the humans make the decisions as to what's automated. So in that instance, a lot of the headache tasks that were real ball breakers ultimately were the things that we were able to automate. Having to look back through 10 years worth of bank statements manually to find out one entry, that was a real headache thing, which machine learning could do in seconds. So we look to find the right thing, and it's not a one size fits all, but the costs and the capabilities have now tumbled sufficiently that you don't have to have super large case requirements to make automation cost effective. You can bring it right the way down to the desktop and just automate processes at a desktop on a user by user basis. So there is capability and tools out there now that will enable that to happen in a much more cost effective way, and let the individual users use the tools in the best possible way. Integrate it with Excel if they're using Excel. Use the tools to provide insights. If Excel's still the preferred tool, you can put the automation across a number of Excels just literally as an insights tool. So there's lots of things that you can do. I am a huge fan, but I'm also a huge fan of humans still. And I think humans do an awful lot of things fantastically well, and long may that continue.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And Kate, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Yes. Well, it is, as has been mentioned, it's such a massively broad subject, and it does depend very much on the perspective that you're taking to view the whole data sphere. From my perspective, a lot of data in relation to procurement comes into the actual building up of the right specification for the requirement. And the way I see it is it has to be viewed holistically from an organizational point of view. If an organization is going to invest in some form of whiz-bang automation stroke data collection, it needs to be something that can mesh from the operational side right through to the procurement side, so that service data, whether that be volume demand data, can be recorded correctly and easily, and then translated into an accurate specification. Goodness, we've all experienced procurements, tenders, whatever, where the specification has been wrong, and then when the contract's awarded, there has had to be some form of contract variation because it's had to be recalibrated because the data that was put in the specification wasn't quite right. So it's really important that data collection or automation that collects the data is holistically viewed from a nose to tail throughout the organisation, operational to procurement, and that the board will buy into that perspective. I think it was Dave said, the analysis of the data to understand how you're going to use it and what you're going to use it for is really important. So collecting the right data for the right reasons, but also making sure that the systems you use can be scalable, so that they will grow as your company grows as well. You really don't want to be investing in something and then having to have huge additional expenditure for a different system because that system can't quite cope with the way your organization has changed or grown. There was one thing I wanted to mention, and this touches on what Andy was saying quite specifically actually, and that's the human element interacting. Which I agree, I think that's so important. And this is particularly in the context of the government green paper that was pushed out, I think it was December last year, into public sector procurement. And one of the proposals was to have feedback to bidders on public sector tenders to be put out as data on a centralised platform. Now, personally, I don't think the sort of spitting out feedback is very productive to bidders in sort of almost aggregate form. I think even a letter which gives more detailed feedback at a more personal level to a bidder from a procurement manager about their bid is much more constructive from the point of view of getting a better quality bid next time and helping the bidder understand how they can tender more effectively, how they can improve their submissions to public sector procurements. So I think from that point of view, whilst it's not human interface, it is much more human than simply having feedback data spat out on a central platform. So the human element, I would agree, is really quite important. Automation, yes, good, if it's the right automation for the right reason, producing the right data that can be used in the right way. But let's not forget that people matter too. It is dependent on the relationship. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kate. So that subject actually links quite well to the first thing we spoke about, supplier relationship management, because I think if you can automate the repetitive tasks, then that actually frees up more time for our procurement people to focus on the strategic supplier relationship and the human angle. Yeah.
If it means you can pay your suppliers faster as well,
Yeah.
because you've automated a lot of the accounts, the kind of payable financial part, that's also going to help your supplier relationship. Nothing's worse when you're building partnerships if you then find out from the supplier that your own finance department has been slow at paying.
Indirectly to that, Matt, and to Steve's question about what suppliers need to do, they need to adhere to procurement policies, and I hate to say order numbers, but if there's an evidence and an authority and that matches the invoice and that matches the provision, a three-way match, they are far more likely to get paid on time rather than talking to the wrong person doing it on the back of a fag packet.
Yeah.
And I think they have to understand from a risk point, from a fraud point, from a Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever the equivalent is these days, point where we're looking at the risk to the business of authorization. If businesses supplying don't adhere to those simple things, they need to be told they will be paid late or not paid. And that's quite a hard line. I certainly go, but they need to understand that's part of a process as well, whether it be automated or manual. If they don't follow the line with authorization of work, it's going to cause a problem.
Yeah. Can I ask one final point on this? I mean, I think, look, it's a good thing, automation. I think it can breed better compliance by having a more structured approach if the whole organization is using the same systems, that's for sure. You can have like a central repository of data. The downside of all these Excel spreadsheets, of course, is that if everyone's got a different spreadsheet on their laptop or whatever, the danger is that everyone's got different data that they're using. That can be disastrous. So that is one downside of that approach. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned very, very briefly is that when you're doing this holistic review of what data you've got, what data you need, and what interpretation you need to deliver off the back of all that data, we mustn't also forget that the other risk now of automation is being hacked. GDPR non-compliance, data privacy breach, being hacked. So all this automation of data, it's great, but when you're developing your systems and the processes, and particularly if it's going to be moving between you as an organization and your supply chains or your customers, mustn't now forget that can all be watched or breached by either competitors or other fraudsters. So it's yet another angle which complicates matters somewhat, but has to be considered. If you're procuring IT systems as part of your role here, that security element has to be checked out.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I think in summary, automation, very important topic within the world of procurement and supply chain, of course. We didn't talk so much about the supply chain, but there's a lot of, I think the buzzword is Amazonification going on in supply chains. But obviously it's something that you have to go in with your eyes open in terms of what you're trying to achieve from it. So thank you for your thoughts on that subject. We're going to move to subject number 3, which is all about social value and corporate social responsibility in procurement. Now we're going to start this by I was just looking at some procurement news yesterday, and I saw that a US lawmaker has urged the Apple boss, Tim Cook, to address the alleged persecution of the Uyghurs and forced labor in China in Apple's supply chain. So, the big companies are under the spotlight. I think not a day goes by where there's not some sort of working practice that is kind of highlighted in the news with these companies and their supply chains. So the question I have for you is, what trends do you see on ethical buying and social value, and what steps should suppliers take to demonstrate their credentials in this area? And I'm going to start, unsurprisingly, with Andy.
That wasn't a surprise. Yeah, well, I think you know, the good news is there's loads of very practical things that one can do. You know, there are the Uyghur Gates of this world and the Pakistani clothing factory Gates of this world that, you know, cause a lot of shock horror, and rightly so. I think I tend to come at it from the other end of not so much how can we stop bad things happening, although that clearly is a good thing to do, but it's really to focus on how much good can be done if procurement is done correctly. And good procurement can bring enormous change to environmental and social governance impact. And there's lots of great things that are happening out there in the world. We have certainly seen at B Corp a huge shift in the last year or so. So the number of companies applying for B Corp, and for those of you that don't know, B Corp is to business what fair trade is to coffee. Effectively, it's a badge that says, you know, you're honest and ethical, and you've got ways of evidence in what you've done. So just like the Fair Trade Labelling Organisation would be able to audit that life cycle of a jar of coffee, B Corp gives you a framework that enables you to do something similar. So B Corp has seen in Q1 of 2021 double the amount of companies going through B Corp than it saw in 2020, and that was double the amount in 2019. So it certainly shows you that there is a growing and an increasing trend in the marketplace that says we want to get our environmental and social and governance correct. It's interesting as well that clients, customers, end user customers are demanding this much more, and evidence in that is, you know, just seeing where people will go and buy. And at the end of the day, a supplier is not really going to do an awful lot if it doesn't see it's going to improve their sales and their capability. They may have good company ethics, they may have strong ethics, but if it's not going to improve their sales, then it'll certainly be a longer and more arduous journey to make the change. But a lot of suppliers are now seeing that, you know, this greening of their industry or greening of their company or making their company more sustainable and more socially ethical is actually good for their bottom line. So we're certainly not talking about trying to destroy the bottom line. If anything, we're talking about trying to enhance it to gain improved margins, to gain improved clients in terms of market share, to attract workers, you know, who want to work for companies that are ethical companies. And indeed, if one is trying to attract investors, then investors are very conscious of ethical investments. So there's hundreds of things that can be done. B Corp has a framework, which is a free to use framework called the B Impact Assessment. There are circa 200 questions on that, so it's not a quickie in terms of going through, and it covers sections including governance, workers, community, how you treat and engage your community, the environment, and also customers. So there's 5 different sections. You score points on that, and if you score a certain threshold, then you can go for certification, which is externally verified. It's a robust certification. It's not a fall off of a log. You know, you really do have to be mindful and purposeful about that. But I think it's a fantastic thing. There's an act that is going through Parliament at the moment called the Better Business Act. It was launched at the end of March, went to Parliament on the 15th of April. And in fact, tomorrow there is a private member's bill that is being voted on as to what they're going to consider, and the Better Business Act is in the mix for that. And if that goes through Parliament, then what is currently within Section 172 of the Companies Act, which is basically the section of the Companies Act that talks about ESG, environmental, social and governance, it will bring that ESG element out of the shadows of Section 172 and inculcate it into a company's articles and objects and make it much more central to their DNA. And part of that will be a call for each company to provide an annual environmental and social impact report alongside their annual report on numbers. So there's a lot of things happening. I think that, you know, the B impact assessment is but one of several tools, but it is international. It's been around for 10 years. It's been in the UK for 5 years. There's a lot of big names that are using it, from one-man operations right the way up to Unilever. Matt is on the B Corp path. Danone, you know, there's some large organizations that are using B Corp. So Unilever is using it as a company by company. They've obviously got multiple companies, but they're gradually working their way through and have said that by 2030 they want every company within, or every business unit, to be B Corp certified. And as part and parcel of that, no great surprise, Unilever are putting out to their supply chain, we have a declared preference to buy from B Corps in our supply chain, because it means that you're all hitting a certain standard, and it means that Unilever are mitigating risk in terms of understanding their supply chain and mitigating risk in their supply chain. So there's a huge amount of things that are there. I am a huge fan of B Corp, but you know, other letters of the alphabet are available. But B Corp is a good one, and because it's free, because it scales, because it's robust, I think it's a pretty good horse to back.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'll move on to Dave next, but before I do that, I see Emma's made a comment. There needs to be a deeper engagement with organisations for the transparency of the data in the supply chain. It said the entire supply chain needs to be incorporated, not just the sort of finishing factories or the end supplier. So taking those comments into account as well. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, I apologise. There's in the middle of a massive thunderstorm kicked off here, so you might see a bit of flashing going on as well. Right, so essentially, I think we need to be careful. The majority of us want ethical supplying. The majority of us want that. We have to recognise, just as we did with health and safety many years ago, and just as we did with quality in the old days of 5750 and all those sort of things, that it has an impact to the cost. That will then dictate your consumer group or your customer group. And I agree that people do want to buy ethically. But if you look at the shop, if you look at the queues outside some of the cheaper clothing shops, for example, I don't think people rushing there after the lockdown was because they were ethical suppliers. I think it's because they were selling cheap clothes, if I'm honest, those sort of things. So there has to be a market resetting with pricing and with expectations, and we have to wait for that to happen, and that will take a long time in some marketplaces. You know, that will take 10 years in some, I'm confident. That shouldn't stop us moving forward now, and it shouldn't stop us doing that. I think one of the areas, this possibly links a little bit to what Emma's saying there, is that it's fine having it in policy, but if you're not then backing it up by checking it down the line, and not checking that these things are happening, then it's pointless having the badge. It's pointless saying you're an ethical sourcer if you're not actually doing it properly. And it shouldn't just be a policy, it should be a vision, it should be a mature decision of your business as to the benefits of ethics. It isn't just about getting this little badge as we had done previously with some of the other international standards, let's say. And now those are reaping rewards. It needs to be seen as a reward, and the international standard, or the standard, is a way of measuring how you're doing it. I think that's very important. From an ex-internal auditor point, trust me, I'm very keen that that is done in a proactive way, in a way that is done harnessing the desires of the consumer as well as desiring what is achievable from the supplier. Because sometimes we might think ethical is possible when actually it's not as easy as you think. And it does mean a massive rethink to your process. Personally, I think with regards ethics and we're talking about CSR here and all those sort of things, that involves everything. It involves your customer base as well. It may be involved in the part where you actually don't want to sell to people because they have a reputational problem. And that's quite a hard one to take on board. We might not want to sell to people for that reason. Now that applies to us as procurement people, because obviously our suppliers should be looking at us and actually say, oh, we've noticed they've got a bad reputation for whatever. Do we want to be tarnished with that? There is a link both ways. But ethical is a massive, massive diverse area, CSR, and social values, all those sort of things. It's a massive area. The fact we're talking about it in 2021 is great, but it's been evolving for years. So we need to move on with it now and see it as a standard part of a procurement acceptance, of a procurement sourcing decision, but also going back to the very first topic, supplier relationship.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Kate, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that has been going on for quite a long time. Having graduated in how many long, oh God, I don't even remember when, it was 1990 in environmental science, when it was just, you know, the impact of business on the environment was really beginning to just sort of become newsworthy, let's say. That was a long time ago, a heck of a long time ago. And yeah, it's, as Emma says, and as everyone says, it's too long now to just be thinking about it and saying, yeah, we'll do it. Andy's, the B Corps thing, if that can be rolled out, and the traction it's gaining seems to be monumental and exponential. I think, you know, that's a really positive initiative there. I think the difficulty could well be when it comes to SMEs who are very focused on what they do, and whilst the intentions will be there, the ability to manage a CSR strategy will not be as focused as it could be within a corporate entity. It's not the focus of their business. The focus of their business is to get a job done, rather than the whole bigger stuff that comes with it as well. And SMEs, what are they? 96% of UK business are SMEs. So I think there is going to be quite a battle there to get the whole CSR agenda really knuckled down in terms of rolling it out through supply chains. What we haven't really looked at is the social value element of ethics in this conversation, which is different from CSR, obviously, and it's something that is very much a focus in public sector procurement here. I think the mandate is to have 10% of tenders, mark schemes, evaluations allocated to social value and suppliers' input into their creating positive benefits for their local area, local communities. This is always a really difficult question from my experience, always very frequently, a very difficult question for businesses, especially small businesses, to answer, to quantify. There are lots of tools now, social value portal being one of them, very onerous, very granular. And when small businesses have to look in the mirror and say, right, what can we do? Yeah, we can take apprentices, but how many? Can we actually do that? Does it fit with our business? It's really, really hard. In a lot of cases, I can't generalize, but in a lot of cases, from my experience, it is quite hard for smaller SMEs to accommodate the social value element. So in terms of going back to the original question, Steve, what was the original question? I'm so concerned, I'm beginning to witter now.
It's the trends on the ethical buying and social value was included in the question.
Yeah.
And what steps should suppliers take to demonstrate their credentials in this area?
Right, well, do the best they can and keep note, keep an audit trail of what they're doing. Have a strategy and keep an audit trail of what they're doing to meet their strategy and keep improving it. Talk to people like Andy who know what they're talking about, know what's going on, and find out ways that they can keep improving. That's what I'd say.
Good, right, thank you, Kate. Graham, your views?
Yeah, I mean, I think just awareness is probably key here, regardless of the size of the organisation that you're in. because I mean we've seen the issues around, say, the modern day slavery legislation that's come out, and there was a lot of press in the last year. You talked about the cheaper retailers, the likes of Boohoo were heavily criticised for their lack of having the basics in place, the lack of having the understanding of just which companies they were using. Now, let's not talk about the specifics, but I think to me a lot of it comes being aware that some of these CSR issues are real, do apply. Modern day slavery isn't something that happens in the Far East. It can happen in the UK. And through your process of tendering, asking the right questions, then cover off points and asking if you got some sort of policy, just having those conversations, whether it is around modern day slavery, whether it's the whole sort of anti-bribery corruption, that just focusing on the legislative side is at least going to start to help. But yeah, it's as you say, Kate, it's not a quick fix, not an easy one. And for smaller businesses, there could be a tendency to do nothing. But I think just having that awareness would certainly be a good start.
Thank you, Graham. And Matt, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways. First of all, I'm going to talk about the good news and then the bad news. And then I'm going to take the point about the suppliers. So the good news is that there's clearly a lot more activity out there, a growing recognition of the needs to grip this whole issue around CSR social value. I think that's partly because the carrots and the sticks are much more significant nowadays. So the carrots, you know, we're seeing some fantastic innovative companies doing the right thing and growing market share off the back of it. Look at Brewdog, who I know became a B Corp organisation just a few months ago. I now enjoy their beer even more because of that, by the way. So there's lots of positive studies out there about the benefit, the commercial benefit. Equally, the carrots are going to be greater. Governmental push, law change, and customer expectations, of course, and people just not spending money with your company anymore if you're seen not to be ethical or showing signs of improvement. So that's the kind of the outlook, if you like, where we are, if you like. I think the concern I have still is the yawning gap between what could be achieved and where we are still, and partly caused by, you know, particularly with SMEs, they don't have the training, the education, they don't have the data. We talked about data earlier. They don't have enough data at their beck and call to make decisions around how they can improve on their ethics down the supply chain, for example. One of the concerns I have with the global supply chains we have, particularly with COVID, where travel has been significantly reduced, how you actually get to grip with the suppliers and understand whether they are being ethical and following, you know, avoiding slave labor, child labor, for example. When you can't actually go and visit and audit them effectively because of lockdown, that's made it much more difficult. And I think this is where the government needs to step in as well, with additional grants and training support to help particularly SMEs to understand, to build strategies, to train their staff, not just procurement but others, so that they can build ethical strategies and actually deliver on that promise, if you like. As for the suppliers and what to answer the other question about what can suppliers do to demonstrate their ethical credentials, because I think they increasingly need to be doing so to win more business, as well as to be seen to be ethical, of course. First of all, there are the obvious badges that you can get. B Corp is one example. ISO accreditation is another. And if you have those accreditations, for goodness sake, use PR, case studies, to make it clear to your marketplace that you are actually adhering to social value and principles of CSR. So, because I think there are a lot of organisations who are not coming to the fore and celebrating what they're doing in this space as well. So I think we've got some big opportunities. I think that we are at a genuine crossroads. People have been talking, as Kate said, about going, thinking about CSR and ethical business for many, many decades. But I think at long last we are seeing much more take up. But there are lots of gaps and lots of training needs to make that good.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Graham has to go now, so thank you for taking part, Graham. You're going to miss the debate on sustainability. I have left 15 minutes to have a discussion on it, though, so we'll carry on. So good to see you. Thank you for that discussion on social value and CSR. I think it's one of those subjects that you can talk all day about, actually, as is the final subject, which we did talk about in the last forum, but there's so much going on in this area that we thought it would be worthwhile having a further conversation about it, and that is sustainability. I noticed Jill's posted something in here. Oh, it's disappeared now. Where is it?
So she's Jill's business has become carbon neutral, I believe, recently.
Yeah. So just evidence that how important it is to businesses. Now, I always like to start with a little bit of what's in the news, as some of you will know. So I was reading yesterday that Tesco has become the first UK retailer to offer sustainability-linked supply chain finance to its suppliers to encourage more suppliers to sign up to science-based emissions reduction targets. So here we are as an example of a business using supply chain finance to encourage sustainability adoption in their supply chain. So the question I have for you is, what are the expectations of buyers on sustainability and environmental considerations with respect to their supply chain, and what should suppliers do to secure business with their clients to give them, well, get a better chance of doing business with their clients? So I'm going to start with Dave.
Sorry, Steve, can you just repeat the first question, please? The expectation.
Yeah, so what are the expectations of buyers on sustainability and environmental considerations? So what are businesses asking for from their suppliers, and how should suppliers themselves respond to be in a better position to win business from their clients?
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
so actually the two are very linked in my mind there. I think what organizations are asking for, it has to be carefully set out in a way that is in a step approach, rather than running. Let's just start walking a little bit first. In some cases, some of the businesses have not set out any sustainability targets or sustainability policies, anything like that, and then others have written policies that, to be honest, are not feasible. They're generally feasible. I think the important thing to do is to see step progress towards improved sustainability. Now, improved sustainability, what does that mean? Does that mean people? Does that mean resource? I mean, people are resource, I appreciate. But you've got to look after both elements there. I think sustainability from the environmental side, it very much depends on the marketplace you're in and how many dependent providers you have, so how many dependent suppliers you have servicing you. If you're on the manufacturing side, you can almost look at that quite easily. If you're looking at service side, and there's people who are coming in and doing service work for you, how do you check that they're being sustainable underneath with how they're doing things? Are you using local providers to do your servicing of your sites? Are you getting people to travel 1,500 miles to come and service something once a year? You know, those sort of things. And where I've been involved in putting policies in place, one of the key things is where are the actual providers based, you know, from a carbon footprint point that comes into this discussion. And how do they deal with waste? How do they deal with their purchase of their products? How do they manage that? How do they audit it? But importantly, how do they step progress within their own life? And I think procurement has to be very careful that we don't endorse a business strategy just because it looks great on a certificate on a wall. You know, we're going to improve our sustainability target by 55% next year. What does that actually mean? Is it achievable, or is it going to be a fudge figure? So where year on year improving sustainability, and here's a graph of it, and sometimes it's steeper than others, that's fine. as long as you're moving in the right direction, as far as I'm concerned. There is an element of pace that needs to happen to this, obviously, because of the damage that's happened to the earth. And I think some businesses have to identify their part in damaging earth. And if they can identify that and therefore identify how they're improving things, that's a great step. And I think when we're talking about suppliers, they need to do the same. They need to look and say, look, what is my impact to this world? From a waste point, from an energy point, from a recycling point, from a person point, you know, from a traveling point. I think one of the big benefits is COVID is this. Some parties have worked out they don't have to travel 200 miles for half an hour meeting. They can do it on Zoom. They might not like it. Yes, it's not as good as face-to-face, but actually there's a lot of sustainable benefits from doing it. I think if people take that on board and think, actually, we could use this to market ourselves, you know, the fact that it's cut down costs internally and has increased efficiency in some places, they can actually knock that out and say, actually, we're being more sustainable. We're telling our people not to travel unnecessarily. Carbon footprint, tick. You know, it helps, doesn't it? So it's actually, it's perversely a benefit of COVID, isn't it? But I think that, to summarise, I think it needs to be a stepped approach, and any policy has to be achievable. And that's where I'll go.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Dave. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Agree with all of that, Dave. And from a very practical perspective, you know, the organisations that I work with the B impact assessment, we talk to them that we're on a kind of a couch to 5K approach. So we're not trying to suddenly become superheroes overnight. And we talk about it as going on a couch to 5K. So a lot of my clients might not consider themselves as having particularly high social or environmental impact, or they might not even consider themselves as being great perpetrators of anything bad as far as the world is concerned. But the impact assessment lets them in the very first instance get a grip and measure where they are so that they can subsequently produce those year-on-year graphs that show what they've actually done. But a lot of clients that I speak to haven't even got a baseline assessment yet in terms of where they are. So that impact assessment is a great tool to just establish where they are in bite-sized chunks. You don't need to boil the ocean. You just ask some fairly simple questions. And Matt, I accepted what you said earlier. You know, a lot of the SMEs don't have the data to hand, but with the SMEs, the benefit, I probably do 95% of my work with SMEs. A lot of the founders and the head honchos there have got that information relatively available to them. So we take clients through it, you know, based on 1 hour a week across 10 weeks. And we find that bite-sized proportionate response to helping clients measure it is, say, you might not have an absolute clue as to where you're at now, but let's just do 1 hour a week for 10 weeks. And like couch to 5K, at the end of that 10 weeks, you'll be up and running. You might not be perfect, but you will be fitter, healthier, stronger, more educated. You'll know what your metrics are, and you can then start to build what that improvement plan will be. So I'm absolutely a keen advocate of start now, start where you are. It doesn't matter where you are. No one else is initially going to judge you. This is really just a self-reflection toolkit that you'll go through. And at least once you've seen that and you've gone through some education, you can then make a plan to improve. And that has been attractive to a lot of the SMEs that I'm dealing with, is that we're not expecting them. I'm saying forget B Corp, you know, whether you get a B Corp certification or not, that's not the issue. The issue is find out how fit you are and what is then going to work as a plan for you to get a little bit fitter.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of doing it.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. Emma has also left, so just the 6 of us left. So Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, right. So I agree, Andy, what you've been saying. I think getting a baseline is critical, isn't it, though? I think knowing where you are, because obviously then if whatever changes you make, you won't be able to understand the benefit of that change unless you've had a baseline. So that's really important. So where do we start? I mean, at the end of the day, I think you asked the question about expectations of buyers, Steve. So
Yeah.
I think the first thing is that, again, the buyers are articulating hopefully what the company wants rather than going off on a limb. They need to have leadership, of course, from their own bosses first and foremost. It's no good. It's going to be difficult to insist upon your suppliers being sustainable if you yourself aren't demonstrating that you've got a plan that you're working towards. And of course, part of that plan, very much from a procurement point of view, is about working with the suppliers. After all, the majority of carbon emission in an organization is not within their own organization, but it's actually down the supply line. So, you know, it's really key that that you work with your suppliers. And again, it's touching upon the supplier relationships that we talked about earlier, and the data management and the automation as well. These all kind of work together, all of these themes, don't they? So as I said, the expectation of the buyer absolutely should be that their suppliers are doing the right thing and demonstrating that they've got a plan, but equally they've got to insist that their own organizations are doing the same thing and that they're working together. How suppliers should be responding to be in a better position? Well, you know, as I said, frankly, whether or not they're getting pressure from the buyers, they should have their own approach. They should be seeing that they're proactive, in other words, and doing it themselves anyway. And they should be also working with their suppliers down the chain. But again, a little bit like what we talked about with the CSR, if they want to get more business, they're going to need to demonstrate and articulate with PR, possibly case studies, that they are actually doing certain things, whatever it is. And they may not have a lot of resource to do a lot of things, but they need to be getting on with it, not worrying about being perfect. Just get on with the process and learn as you go. I think the other thing which I'm very keen on encouraging is peer-to-peer sharing of information. One of the things that's essentially positive about sustainability is it ought not be a competitive point. We're all living on the earth. We all have to step up and improve. So this shouldn't be one where you're competing with others. You should work with competitors, work with suppliers, work with all stakeholders, so that we can speed up the process of improving and reducing the carbon in the supply chains. So I think we should be working together. And I think, as I said at the beginning of this, procurement has an amazing position where it can drive this change through, both internally and across the supply chains.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And Kate, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, all of the above. I think, you know, absolutely essential for if you're talking about supplier, buyer's expectations of supplier, the buyer will invariably expect the supplier to meet and or exceed their own approach to sustainability, to mitigation of environmental or other adverse impacts. The measure to make the collection of data, making measurable improvements, starting from that baseline. You know, as we've mentioned, if you're starting from a standing start, baby steps, and then once you've got things going, you can then make sure that you're making a real difference from the baby steps that you've done, and be prepared to make changes on how you do things that create fewer impacts. And a higher level of sustainability from the organisation towards the environment. That is, I think, what a buyer would expect to see from a supplier: commitment to sustainability and a clear strategy of how they were going to achieve it. Does that cover both bases on the question?
Thank you.
Right.
Just to pick up on something Matt said as well, I've been talking to the procurement manager of a large law firm, and if you look at their website, you can see that for them, sustainability is the really important thing, because they want to sort of set their credentials in the market. They want to demonstrate to their clients that it's an important thing for them. So when I had the conversation with the procurement manager, I did have a chat with him about costs and value for money, and he didn't seem that concerned. I think generally they thought they're doing quite a good job and didn't really need any help. But the area that they did need help on was on sustainability. And I think, Matt, you made the point, get your own house in order first, and I think they have. But where they're struggling a little bit is, how do you then implement supply chain sustainability, right? How do you make your suppliers more sustainable? And I don't know, it's easy enough to do it within your own business, I think, with various things that you can do, but it is a bit more difficult to roll that down the supply chain.
Except that if you are doing it yourselves, you'll have learnt lessons, and it's worth sharing that insights. Equally, asking for insights up the chain too, because no one has all the answers at the end of the day. We're all learning. This is still relatively early days for many organisations around this, rightly or wrongly. So I think this is, and again, talking about supplier relationships, you know, we should be having discussions with suppliers, not just about delivery performance, quality, time, turnaround speeds, and all the rest of it, but actually, okay, how do we work together? And what have you been doing? What have your clients been doing? What have your suppliers been doing? So it's this whole integration approach, sharing best practice, so we're not all reinventing the wheel. What works, what doesn't work, how do we improve? I think that's the trick. Communication, making it clear that as a buyer, you are seeing sustainability as a significant part of your buying decision now. But equally, you recognise that not all suppliers are up to the same level of maturity around this. So let's work together, particularly SMEs. You know, let's work with the SMEs who don't have the resources and the money to spend on training, or whatever. I hope that the larger corporates are engaging with the smaller businesses and bringing them up to speed as well, because that's part of their role.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I think we
just to say, Steve, I had an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, just very quickly, I had an interesting conversation with ENGIE, one of the large energy producers. They're putting a bid at the moment into Bristol for the Bristol Leap project, which is a new energy project in Bristol. Kate, they're putting their social value score on the tender at 30% of the weighting of the point.
Yeah, Bristol is quite hot on social value.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that it's so high. But what ENGIE are looking to do, Matt, is work with all of the SMEs, that if they win that contract, they'll have a whole local ecosystem, because they've committed to using a local ecosystem as part of their supply chain delivery. But they are looking at using a tool like B Corp, not to say you have to be B Corp certified, but at least complete the B impact assessment if you want to be working with ENGIE, declare what that score is, and then work with us, and we'll work with you to help you improve on that journey. So it's interesting to see that that is the sort of level of conversation that is taking place for real.
Yeah, well, that needs to be, everyone needs to be having those conversations.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we've reached the time where we have to conclude the discussion. I can see Jill nodding her head there. So thank you everyone for taking part in today's panel. We've gone through a number of important topics around supplier relationship management, automation, social value, CSR, and sustainability. I hope you've all thought it's been a good debate, and I'd like to thanks again for your help today. And with that, I'll say goodbye.